Democratic candidate Tulsi Gabbard recently made an appearance on Dave Rubin's YouTube show. And I just wanna note, he's not really a progressive or a liberal. He kind of comes at things from a more libertarian perspective. So it's fascinating to see how he frames questions about various political issues and how she answers them. Now we're gonna start off with a clip about how much Tulsi Gabbard loves the country. Take a look.
I had Glenn back in here a couple days ago, and he said, he didn't even know that you were coming on because this just happened in the last day or so. But what he said was, I disagree with Tulsi on almost everything, but it's very obvious that she loves this country. And I think one of the things that's happening for sort of mainstream liberals, let's say not progressives, but sort of old school liberals, and then pretty much everyone on the right, is they're watching the candidates, the Democratic candidates, and there's this sense that they don't really love the country. Like they really think it's so fundamentally broken or wrong or historically awful or some version of that, but that doesn't come across with you. That's not even a question, I'm just handing you something.
Yes, I am unabashed in my love for our country. It's what's motivated these major decisions that I've made with what I want to do with my life.
And I retweeted one of your last tweets, which was like a 30-second clip where you talked about freedom and liberty and things like that. I love all those words, but those words now have been really associated with the right and not with Democrats. Do you find it odd that, I mean, right in there's a giant American flag in my control room and all of those things, and I've got the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in there. Like, do you find it odd that it seems that the Democrats aren't embracing those things? There's a weird running from them.
I'm disheartened by it because of all of those who have sacrificed for our freedoms.
A lot of different things to touch on there, but the framing of Rubin's question is the top issue for me because the way he framed that was, progressives don't love America, do you agree?
She basically said yes.
And she took the bait.
And remember, she's positioning herself as a progressive candidate. So
positioning's a good word for it.
Positioning is the correct word for it because you look at her voting record, you look at a lot of other issues, including other snippets from this interview, which we're gonna show you later. And she might talk the talk when it's convenient. She certainly doesn't walk the walk, and she does not challenge Rubin on his right-wing, anti-progressive framing in a lot of these questions. And by the way, so loving a country just means never critiquing it, never criticizing it, and showing a blind love and like just a blind loyalty to it no matter what. Like it's a fascinating way of putting things. Like you can love the country, you can be loyal to the country, but you can have issues with how it's run. You can have issues with the history of the country. We're not allowed to find the genocide of Native Americans questionable in this country's history. We're not allowed to talk about slavery. We're not allowed to talk about what it was like before the civil rights era. We're not allowed to talk about what it's like now for a lot of people in disenfranchised groups.
I don't even know what he's talking about when he's talking about her. He's got a flag. But I mean, to be fair to her in this instance, I don't know what he's talking about that distinguishes her as loving the country more in this right-wing framing than the other candidates. Like what specifically about her? The fact that she's a veteran. Pete Buttigieg, I can't talk today. Pete Buttigieg is a veteran. So what's the difference here? The difference is that she kind of plays both sides when it comes to these kinds of issues. And so when we're talking about progressivism, I don't think it's progressive to not endorse Medicare for all or be a co-sponsor of it when it's first introduced and then sign on to it later when it becomes a presidential talking point. You're planning a run in 2018 and you sign on in 2016. And then your supporters go online and say Elizabeth Warren's the hack when she was a co-sponsor right away. So that's very fascinating to me. But keep going. What's your name? Anna?
Oh, damn, throwing me under the bus.
I'm sorry, I'm so tired.
Well, okay, David, did you want to comment on this before we move on to the next clip?
I'm too busy reading the big giant blow up Constitution in the control room right now.
See, we love the country. We have a giant American flag behind us.
Look at that.
So, all right, well, let's move on to the next topic at hand. And this has to do with immigration. And again, pay close attention to how Dave Rubin frames the question and how Tulsi Gabbard answers.
So immigration, I think there's a general sense that the candidates, the Democrats are basically trying to outdo each other for open borders, something like that. A, do you think that's a fair way to start the question? And B, where do you sit on that?
I don't support open borders. Without secure borders, we don't really have a country. I think there's a few things that we've got to do when we're talking about immigration reform. One is we've got to have secure borders. This is not Trump's wall from sea to shining sea. It's about seeing, again, what makes sense. I look at things from a practical, objective-oriented standpoint. I'm a soldier, so I look at what's our objective? Secure the borders. In some places, it may make the most sense to have a wall or some kind of physical barrier in place. In other places, it won't make sense. So you use technology and use all the other tools that we have ultimately to accomplish that objective of security at the borders.
Wait, let me pause you there. So is the problem, though, just from that starting point, which seems so obvious? I think the average person watching this is going, of course, countries exist because there are borders. But even that starting point, you're going to get people that are further to the left of you going, well, there's some level of racism or xenophobia there, or, I mean, there's always that subtext to this conversation.
Which is, I think it's a big problem.
Further to the left of you, so she's not positioning herself as left on this issue. And secondly, if you were an actual progressive and you went on that show, you would balk at the notion that Democrats are in favor of open borders. No one has said that, ever. And any person that's gonna go on a right-wing talk show and listen to that talking point who identifies as someone who's on the left has to just sweep that away right away and say, that's not what we're talking about here. But no, she agrees with the framing, and perhaps that's because she voted present on a Republican bill that said we have to support our ICE officers and make sure that we don't abolish ICE, when people like Beto O'Rourke voted against that. So when we're having a conversation about progressive policy when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, there's red flag after red flag after red flag. And look, I thought that her resigning from the DNC was really brave, and I really supported her anti-interventionist foreign policy until I took a further look and realized that a lot of it is based in dislike of Muslim people.
And that's evident in her vote to ban Syrian refugees from coming to the United States. It's evident in the fact that she was the only Democrat in Congress who was willing to go see Benjamin Netanyahu speak before Congress in his disdain for the Iran nuclear deal.
And imagine if Elizabeth Warren did that, seriously.
Oh, I mean, we know that there's a double standard when it comes to the individuals who support Tulsi Gabbard. There are certain things that she can do that they will overlook. They don't care, right? It's totally fine. But if any other candidate, including Warren or even Bernie Sanders, had voted the same way, the reaction would be different. Can you imagine if Elizabeth Warren had voted in favor of a resolution condemning the BDS movement? I mean, we wouldn't stop hearing about it, right? And by the way, that would be legitimate criticism. We would criticize her for that. But I want to move on to one other thing, because you're right. The way that that question was framed was progressives want open borders. And Rubin, if you listen carefully, specifically asks, is that a fair way to frame the question? And she's like, yeah, I think that's fair. And then she moves on. Okay, well, name one candidate in the Democratic Party who has said that they want open borders. In fact, Bernie Sanders unequivocally said that he does not support open borders. So it's just fascinating how she allowed that smear to just go by when there isn't a specific example of an individual running for president right now on the Democratic side who wants open borders. It's frustrating to see just like the very careful way everyone treats this one particular candidate. First of all, no candidate is above criticism, not a single one, right? Bernie Sanders votes the wrong way, we're gonna call him out. Elizabeth Warren, the way she answered your question on defense spending, skirted the issue. We did a story criticizing her on that because that's the fair and honest way to cover these stories. Pretending as if Tulsi Gabbard is a progressive is ridiculous to me. And I'm not gonna like pretend like I'm buying into it. Are there some progressive issues that she's signed on to here and there? Sure. But if you look at her overall record, you cannot tell me that she's a progressive. When she's rubbing shoulders with Narendra Modi, who turned the other way as thousands of Muslims were raped and murdered in the Gujarat riots, I mean, come on.
Or going to fundraisers hosted by right-wing Israeli groups when, yet again, what's it called? Christians for Israel. Okay, we're still having a conversation about the progressivism. And it's because other progressive talk show hosts or pundits online are afraid of the the Tulsi Gabbard fans. I'm not afraid of you guys. I'm not afraid of you guys.
No,
I'm gonna call it like it is. And sorry, I'm gonna dive into the internet pit, and it's fun for me because I wanna call things like they are.
RIP her mentions.
Yeah, I don't care anymore. It's fun.
But it's not even about, look, people are gonna get upset when you criticize their candidate one way or the other, right? And it is what it is, but it's not gonna stop us from doing our job. So let me continue doing our job by going to the next video. And this has to do with gun control. Take a look.
Ask her about guns. You got to ask her about guns because the general feeling, they want their guns basically. So can you just sort of lay out your position?
Yeah, I think that I stand up for Second Amendment rights. I don't think it conflicts with the need. I feel we also need to have sensible gun safety regulation. I think that the fact that we have not seen any kind of legislation pass for a very long time is because on one side you have people who say there should be absolutely no regulation whatsoever on guns and who can own them. And on the other side, you have folks who are saying that they want to repeal the Second Amendment and they want to get rid of guns completely and take everyone's guns away. And you have those two extremes on both sides kind of pointing their arrows at each other with no real substantive dialogue and conversation happening with that entire space in the middle where we recognize that there's no conflict between upholding our Second Amendment rights while also making sure that these guns are not put into the hands of those who would seek to do incredible harm to other people.
So what would be a sensible law that isn't passed already? Because that it always seems to come down to that.
Well,
they'll say we need background checks.
Yeah. I mean, that's one that that we just passed with some bipartisan support from the House. It's sitting in the Senate now, waiting for movement.
When you hear things like the city of San Francisco designating the NRA a terrorist organization, do you think that's helping or hurting?
I don't think. I think that further deepens the divide.
So what stood out to me in that answer was her statement about the House legislation on gun control sitting in the Senate waiting for movement. That is a great opportunity as a so-called progressive candidate, as a Democratic candidate, you don't even have to be a progressive, to call out Mitch McConnell for blocking votes on that type of legislation. But she's very careful to avoid criticizing members of the right. If you listen to the entirety of that interview, she tries to play both sides. She talks about bipartisanship. She talks about working together and finding common ground.
It's very Obama-esque.
It's very Obama-esque, and we all know what happens when Democrats talk about bipartisanship.
Right.
It means concession after concession after concession. We need bold change. That's why there is this surge of progressivism within the Democratic Party. That's the reason why she's latched onto that label to help her, even though it hasn't really worked so far because her record speaks for itself. But in reality, look, talk is talk. If you're gonna claim to be a progressive, you can't sit there and pretend as though there are Democratic candidates who are trying to take all the guns away. No one has advocated for that. No one on the left has said.
Or abolishing the Second Amendment. She just accepted that framing.
Right.
It's just,
no.
I'm not even necessarily saying she's a bad person. I'm saying she's a blank slate and she's not a progressive. Like she's just like going with the Rubin framing.
Throughout the entire interview.
So if you have strong progressive principles, you're not gonna do that, and she doesn't have them.
Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.